success a bad thing? Why, if you're a millionaire, you're evil. If you're a billionaire, you're the Antichrist. Why? Because of their pathetic jealousy. That's all it is. Jealousy. Seth, you're worried? You're worried that some people don't like you in the locker room? Hell, if you ain't making enemies, you ain't making money. If everybody doesn't hate you, then you are not living up to your full potential. And everybody here wants to say, well, at least you'll sleep well at night. Sleep? Who has time for sleep? I would rather eat well than sleep well. I would rather drive a nice car, fly in a private plane, live in a mansion, live the good life, Seth. You get one shot at life, one shot, one go around in this world. You take life and you grab it by the throat and you make it give you everything you want and screw everybody else.
What is up, guys? Welcome back to the pod. I hope you have had a fantastic week as always. Today is Saturday, March 26, 2022. And I thought it was important to kind of take some time specifically dedicated to the news that broke yesterday. Sure, you guys have heard it right now, so it's not breaking news at this point, but I obviously felt it was definitely important to touch on and to dedicate maybe this ends up being a specific show or just the first half of the full show itself to Triple H and the news that broke yesterday on Stephen A. Smith's World. I believe that was the show that it broke on. Some people were saying it was on First Take. Some people were saying it was Stephen A. Smith's World, which is a show that he obviously has on ESPN Plus. I think it airs on, but I'm so, full disclosure, I'm a little unsure of where it originally aired, but obviously it was with Stephen A. Smith himself conducting the interview. But I ended up watching it on YouTube, so that's why I don't know the exact original airing of it, because I was pretty sure it was the Stephen A. Smith's World show, but then some people were saying First Take, so regardless, it's pretty simple and pretty easy for you guys to go out there and find, so I definitely recommend doing so if you're a fan of the business, which obviously you are if you're listening to this, and if you are, as always, I do appreciate you guys for listening and adding me to your feed, wherever you're listening at the show through, whether it's like Apple, Spotify. It's so cool to see the list of streaming services, which, to be honest with you guys, I didn't, and not to get off too topic here, but I didn't even realize there were so many different options, and especially when it comes to like different parts of the world, right? The show kind of touches a number of different countries, which again is super cool, and I thank you guys and I appreciate it, but it's really cool to see all the different streaming services that are out there too. So again, not to get too sidetracked, but I thought it was definitely important to kind of address this topic and this news separately. So and of course, like I said, with Triple H announcing yesterday with Stephen A. Smith that he is retiring from the ring and that portion of his career is over with. I think it was 30, 25, 26, between 25, 30 years in totality for his in-ring career. Of course, I believe he debuted in 1992. So that, math-wise adds up. So for me, it's kind of sad, like for me personally, he was a huge, huge, huge part of my wrestling fandom and my wrestling life, to kind of give you guys a time frame, I started watching wrestling in the late 90s, so 97, 98, 99, probably 98, 99 more so, but for me, there wasn't like a specific night that I remember like, oh yeah, it was this night in particular, or this wrestler or whatever. I remember my friend Elena turning on a random SmackDown episode and just kind of being hooked ever since. But I really started paying close attention and it really seeped into my life, more so in the early 2000s, probably 2000, I would say late 2001, obviously early 2002, 2003, is when it really took off and I really embraced it more and really kind of just wanted to learn more about it and just made it more part of my life. And obviously it's carried on since then, not to age myself, but so that kind of gives you an idea of as to why Triple H has been a main focal point in my wrestling life, and obviously in regards to WWE, like he was always the top guy, the top heel, the champion. Like he really ran the place for countless years and was on top for X amount of time. So, and he was always one of my favorites. I'm not gonna lie. He was always one of the guys that I was always I was always engulfed in what he was into, and obviously, too, with him being who he was and everything. And I'm sure if you're a big wrestling fan, which you, again, most likely are since you're listening to a wrestling podcast on it, you've heard the inside reports, all the gossip and rumors, how he's held X amount of wrestlers down, he's used his power to kind of push himself, and whatever, the range of stories that are out there about him. Obviously, I don't know what's true and what's not. Some of them would make sense. Like not gonna sugarcoat anything. Some of it would make sense depending, or not depending, but especially with his position, and all that shit. So I could very easily see X amount of things being true. That's not really what I sat down here today to get into, though. But I would be remiss to kind of talk about his career in a way, and then not address some of the negative shit that most likely happened as well. But I'm not going to sit here and single anything out specifically for that reason, because I don't know exactly what did or what didn't happen. So just to kind of get that out there, I don't know if you want to call that a disclaimer or whatever, but just kind of to be mindful, I guess, of that as well, and to lead with that too. And I think that's kind of important as well, because of the time frame that he really took off, the early 2000s, and him being the heavyweight champion for so long, and all that good stuff. So just to kind of get that out of the way, because I think it's foolish and kind of disrespectful if anyone out there who does a podcast, has a wrestling website or anything like that, if you have any type of platform, even if you're just on Twitter, like you can't just sit there and harp on all the negative shit that he did, or I'll just say most likely did do, or whatever, like it is. And I don't want to downplay it either. And that's why I'm not bringing up anything in particular, and I'm not going to kind of go on too long about this, but I just kind of wanted to address, I don't know if it's like an elephant in the room type shit either or whatever, but whatever you classify it as, all the negative shit that has happened in the past regarding Triple H and whatever the rumors are and whatever may be true, all that is out there. But I think it's foolish to just harp on that and disregard all the positive and all the good things that he did do for the business thereafter, especially with NXT obviously being the main thing that everyone gives him the rightful credit for, and what he did for that brand and all that good stuff, which we'll touch on in a little bit here. But Triple H was always that guy. He was always the main guy that all your favorites like Stone Cold, The Rock, Mick Foley went after, right? So to know that he's no longer going to be wrestling in ring it's really sad for me. So that's why I kind of wanted to just lay that foundation out there and touch all those bases before we kind of move on there and address exactly what he said and what may be the future for him and all that good stuff. But it's kind of eye-opening as well to hear himself describe what he went through, and looking back on it as well, I'm kind of happy that, for instance, Stephanie wasn't the one who went out there and said, yeah, X, Y, and Z happened. And I kind of more so respect the privacy and the fact that they, as a company, they addressed that he underwent a heart condition, and I forget, I think they labeled it as like a cardiac event. When the tweet or whatever, the news, however they sent it out originally, when it initially happened. But it's really, and to see how emotional he got, that's kind of why I'm getting hung up on my words right now, because to see, and that's why I definitely encourage everyone who's listening to this to seek out the YouTube clip itself or the show itself, however you are able to view it, because there's a specific moment during the interview where he addresses that he was going to go in for a procedure and a surgery, and he didn't know if he was going to wake up after it, and he and Stephanie um, obviously they're, husband and wife, but they have their family, they have their own family. They have three daughters. I believe he said that they are ages 15, 13, and 11. So I can't even imagine being in his shoes and going in for a surgery and not knowing if you're going to come out on the other side, and wake up from it, because you have a whole family, and of course, like, no one wants to leave this earth, right? But to be essentially like the man of the house for his situation in particular, to be the man of the house, to be what he labeled himself as, like the superhuman and the superhero of his daughter's lives, like he's not supposed to get sick, and not saying he's not supposed to get sick, but he's like he's their rock and he's their superhero, as he, every father, rightfully should be. So to hear him kind of address that situation and to kind of show that vulnerable side to himself, which we don't really get to see much of, if we ever have, and especially him and Stephanie, they're kind of private when it comes to their family in particular, like their daughters, which again, totally respect and respect them for that. They could easily, I don't want to say exploit them, because that's always, it has like a harsh and a negative tone to it, but their daughters, I don't know, like a lot of celebrities post their kids on, like, for instance, Instagram and Twitter a lot more, and they don't really do that. So you just definitely, you kind of respect their wishes and respect their approach to that. So I say that just because having him address his daughters and the family aspect, and of course Stephanie was standing not too far away from him when he was giving the interview itself, just to see the family aspect, and it kind of have a little peek behind the curtain. It was really emotional, and it was a deep moment to see him get so, obviously, like I said, emotional and visually emotional as well. He got teary-eyed and choked up a few times there. So again, I definitely recommend you seek out the clip itself. It's, again, maybe 15-20 minutes max. It's definitely something that, if you're a fan of the business and Triple H, you owe it to yourself and to him to see. But again, it kind of leaves a lot of questions there too as well, with him officially retiring from in-ring duties. It's going to open up his schedule more. He knows now that there's never going to be a time where they're going to call on him to have a WrestleMania moment or a match, or to fill in for this guy who can't compete or anything like that, which sucks. Don't get me wrong. I'm not sitting here saying that's a good thing, but he can completely remove that factor and that idea from his brain now, and just focus on his executive position and his duties for their NIL program, their NIL program that they're going to be doing. And of course, the headline with that is Gable Steveson. That's going to be, hopefully, in their minds, rather their breakout star. So it sounds like, and towards the end of the interview, Stephen A had asked him something to that regard as well, like what does the future hold for him, and it sounds like that's what it's going to hold, him kind of focusing on the future of WWE as well. So it definitely didn't seem like, like he's leaving WWE or anything like that. So I put all those rumors to rest, with Shane being let go from WWE a few months ago now, whatever the time frame was. People were running wild with the assumption and the possibility of Triple H being let go, and it definitely doesn't sound like that. Again, anything is possible, with WWE, but I definitely don't see that being a thing now, especially since he's just an executive. But yeah, it just sucks, as I sit here and continue to kind of go back and forth between him as the executive and his in-ring career being over with. It just sucks, because in a lot of ways too, though, I'm kind of selfishly happy and feel fortunate that his last WrestleMania match, for instance, was at WrestleMania 35 against Batista, which kind of in retrospect is a cool thing. You know, that was one of his, obviously his Evolution buddies and members. So that's kind of a nice little poetic tie there when you think about that. And his last actual televised match was against Randy Orton, and I believe it was a Saudi Arabia match, which again, another Evolution member. But both of those guys, he had very extensive and lengthy feuds with. Randy Orton more so than Batista, but he was an integral part and factor of Batista's establishing of Batista as a big star, and in the early part of Batista getting over as a big deal and being a champion. So I think if you remove Triple H from both of their careers, it may not have gotten off to such a good and heavy and skyrocketing start as it did. So that's just a little factor when you think of the grand totality of everything that Triple H, either the character or Paul Levesque, the human and the employee, has been a part of. It's just kind of like Scott Hall that I mentioned last week. It's kind of fascinating to sit back and think about. If you were to remove Triple H from the wrestling world and the wrestling industry as a whole, like, I can't even imagine what it would look like now, because he had a big hand and a big factor, or a big part rather, in so many different things. You think back to the Clique, you know, and that infamous night in Madison Square Garden with that whole moment and what that spawned, the Attitude Era, D-Generation X, him being the solid heel champion that he was, and really being, like I mentioned earlier, the go-to bad guy for all of our favorites to kind of go against. And I know it's just really fascinating to think about how impactful he was in this business. So while it does suck that his in-ring career is over, it's kind of cool to sit here and think about too, like, okay, yes, and it's cool from my perspective. I'm sure he's, you know, it sucks for him on a completely different level, because we all know, I mentioned, like, one of the first things I thought of when I heard the news was, it's sad because we all know as fans how much he genuinely loved competing in the ring and being a wrestler. Like, that's why he was so good as in the role that he had with NXT and developing that brand and that almost that separate company in its own right. Because he was such a fan of the business itself, and he was such a fan of being a wrestler. So when you have that fandom, it just makes an executive role, in my mind, so much easier, because the transition is so much easier, because you have kind of the best of both worlds, right? Like, you have the wrestler's mindset, and then you have the executive mindset and what you need for the business side of wrestling in and of itself. But I definitely want to sit down maybe one day, and I'll put this, I'll write this, make a note of this to myself. I definitely kind of want to sit down and dive deep into the career of Triple H and the journey, and to kind of think about the fact that if we did remove him, and we were to remove him completely from the wrestling industry, how much that would have changed the direction of you know, both companies, and I say that in regards to, like, WCW and WWF at the time. But I do want to, like I said, I think I kind of sitting here talking about it and thinking about it a little bit more. I want to do proper research and just an overview of his whole in-ring career, now that we have a beginning, middle, and an end. So I definitely kind of want to sit down and do a little bit more research and actually see if I was hesitant to say if I was gonna, or to think about if I was gonna mention this out loud to you guys, but I'm a big, like, graph and, like, stats person, which I may have mentioned on the pod before, but like a flow chart in a sense, like, to think of the trajectory of so many different careers and the companies and all that good shit, if Triple H wasn't involved. So that's a mental note and a physical note that I'm gonna make for myself here. But I definitely do want to mention what he said in a few pieces here in the interview itself before we wrap up the Triple H segment itself. Because, like I said, I think it's just proper to kind of maybe just put his actual words out there for you guys if you haven't, if you're catching the pod prior to seeing the interview itself. And again, if you are, thank you, I appreciate that. But a few things in kind of just the beginning portion of him addressing his health condition itself. he just flat out said, he said, quote, "I would never wrestle again," unquote. And of course, he's listed as an executive vice president as well, his official title. But he said, quote, "First of all, I have a defibrillator in my chest, which, probably not a good idea for me to get zapped on live TV," end quote. Yeah, man, it sucks. Triple H has a defibrillator, which, again, I say that, it sucks, but I'm so thankful that he's still here and that he looks healthy. Like, I probably should have said that earlier as well, so I apologize for that. But he looks great. Like, I love his get up too. Like, I loved his suit. He looked professional, but I love the bracelets that he wears and just his own style to everything too. So just shout out to him for that as well. But he did move on to kind of give us a little bit more specifics regarding it. Another part of the interview, he said, quote, I was nosediving and sort of at the 1 yard line of where you don't want to be really for your family and your future, unquote. Yeah, man, and this is kind of where it got a little emotional in the interview itself. He said, "There's moments in there where they're putting you out for stuff and you think, is this it? Do you wake up from this? That's tough to swallow. It makes you think differently." Which, yeah, like, it doesn't matter who you are, what profession you're in, or anything like that. Like, it's really humbling, and it just kind of makes you rethink life in and of itself. But he did move on to kind of address things a little bit more specifically and give actual numbers. Apparently, there's I don't know exactly what it is, but there's a particular part of your heartbeat, right? But he actually addressed that specifically, so I kind of wanted to pull up some actual specific information that he addressed. But to kind of start off, he said, "I had viral pneumonia. My lungs were inflamed. As the next couple of days went on, when I got home, it increasingly got worse. My wife, Stephanie, saw some blood and stuff that I was coughing up. I went and got checked. It was coming from the viral pneumonia, but I had fluid in my lungs. I had some fluid in my heart." Crazy, just so crazy. He's so young. I think he's like 52. But he did mention later on that it's a genetic issue and that pretty much his dad, his grandfather, and his great-grandfather have had similar issues. So it's just one of those unfortunate things. But he went on regarding the heart situation, the pumping of the heart in particular that I mentioned. He said, quote, "The way your heart pumps out, 55 to 65% of your ejection fraction is a good number. I was at 30. I got a quick text message saying, 'Don't take time, pack a bag real quick, head to the emergency room. I'll fill you in on the way.'" And that was from his doctor. He did later on go on to say by the time he got to the hospital, his ejection fraction had dropped to 22%. He said he was at heart failure pretty bad. The next morning, it got down to 12%, and that was when he went on to say he was nosediving. Quote, "I was nosediving, sort of at the 1 yard line from where you need to be or where you don't want to be really for your family or your future. When they tell you it's 99%, when they tell you it's 99%, it gets real. We have 3 young girls, 15, 13, and 11. Triple H, mentioned, of course, his daughters was Stephanie. Their names are Aurora Rose, Murphy Claire, and Vaughn Evelyn. Very pretty names, very, very different and very pretty names. So shout out to them for the name selection there. But he did kind of go back in and reference the moments again, saying, "Suddenly I come home, I'm a little bit sick, and their dad, who's strong, always is settling in the hospital. I don't know if they understood the consequences of it." And then that's kind of when he got a little bit more emotional, saying, "There are moments when they're putting you out for stuff, and you think, this is it. Do you wake up from this? That's tough to swallow. It makes you think differently about life. It doesn't make you any less driven for the things that you do, but it certainly makes you appreciate the things that you have more, your friends, your family." Yeah, so just to kind of give a little bit more perspective into the interview itself, it's just sad, just so sad and so scary to think of everything that he went through. But again, like, just shout out to him and thank God for Stephanie, like, people give her a lot of shit, but as human beings, we have to remember these they're still human beings, so we can think what we want about either them as executives, what we think we know about them as executives, and them as on-screen characters, which of course, we definitely have our right to our own opinions, but at the end of the day, they're still human beings with families and lives, so it's definitely, it's sad to think that everything and the scare and the severity of everything that he went through, and obviously the fact that he has a defibrillator now and that he'll never wrestle again definitely sucks, but there's always a silver lining, in everything. At least that's what I try to look at, and obviously the main thing and the obvious thing here is that he's still with us. That should be the most important thing to everyone. Everything else obviously comes second, but the fact that he's still with us and he's still healthy, he looks great. He's here for his family, and he's still, in a lot of ways, essentially healthy. It sounds like he's able to go on with his day-to-day duties. His life has obviously changed a lot. He didn't mention his workout schedule and his training schedule, if he's still able to do stuff like that or anything like that, but which is, again, why I hope we get maybe another follow-up interview or another interview that could be a little bit longer, just to kind of get a better idea of what his just everyday life looks like now. Just him as a human being, how he's adapting, and how, because working out and bodybuilding was always, a huge love of his. So that's, I'm sure, taking a toll and a hit as well. But I kind of wanted to just get this out here for you guys and get something quick. But I definitely appreciate you guys listening, and I'll definitely be dropping another show as well, either later today or tomorrow, just kind of addressing the whole week in review in the wrestling world. But thank you guys so much for the download and for checking us out. Feel free to follow me on Twitter at ASHMANNS, and the show's Twitter page at KickAshPodcast_. And again, we are on TikTok as well, KickAsh Podcast. But again, I will be talking to you guys shortly. Take care, guys.